Borneo's history is fascinating and sometimes bloody. For centuries, the port of Brunei was well known as a contentious and much sought after trading post. It was assimilated or conquered by the Indonesian, Chinese and the Dutch, even being briefly attacked by Spain. Borders drawn by British and Dutch control are still almost untouched as the borders between Kalimantan, Indonesia and Sabah and Sandakan, Malaysia. Bornean and Australian histories are surprisingly entwined. This was highlighted during World War II and the harsh Japanese occupation that saw the deaths of thousands of local natives and Chinese immigrants. The occupation, which went on for 3 years, drove much of the population to the interior of the island. Numerous rebel forces of locals rose up and engaged in guerrilla warfare against the Japanese, briefly reviving headhunting as a practice. Brave Australians contributed heavily to the liberation of Borneo in 1945, especially the guerrilla team known as Z Special Unit. The occupation came to an end on the 10th of June 1945 at the battles of North Borneo and Labuan, with the combined effort of the Bornean, Australian and American forces. The Kandasang War Memorial pays tribute to the soldiers, both Bornean and Allied, who served in World War II, with specific emphasis on those who died during the Sandakan death marches. The Sandakan death marches, while remaining relatively unknown outside of Borneo, are widely considered to be one of the worst military atrocities ever to befall Australian forces. After the Battle of Singapore in 1942, captured Australian and English POWs were shipped to North Borneo to construct a military airstrip. The prisoners were forced to work at gunpoint, beaten daily, and were given almost no food and negligible medical attention, with sick prisoners forced to work until they dropped. In January 1945, Allied bombing successfully destroyed the airstrip. With Allied landings threatening to overtake the camp, Captain Hoshijima Susumi decided to move the remaining 1,900 prisoners towards the mountain region of Brunei, about 260 kilometres away. Taking place over a few months, 3 separate marches over Mount Kinabalu were instigated. Almost all prisoners were sick with dysentery or malaria and were severely malnourished. Any who fell along the wayside were either left to die or were killed by the soldiers. Of the 2,000 odd POWs, only 6 Australian servicemen managed to survive, by escaping into the jungle during the second march, where they were aided by locals and eventually saved by Allied units. Of those 6 survivors, only 4 survived the lasting effects of their treatment long enough to deliver testimony at war trials in Tokyo and Rabaul. Today, several memorials remain, and knowledge of the atrocities is starting to spread outside of Borneo with the help of locals and wartime academics.
I didn't tell anyone beforehand or anything, but I kind of knew my grandfather was in a prison of war camp in Borneo, and I knew I thought he would be on the wall, but I didn't get my hopes up because you never know, like, people get lost in history and that, so just kind of walked up there and I knew his last name was Slip, so went straight up to where he was and knew his age, and yeah, there he was. And it was a bit of a sombering moment to feel he didn't die for nothing. Like, he didn't die and not get remembered. Like, they're still remembering him in the country that he fought to help. Everyone that heard about it and saw it, they all came and shook my hand. It was really like, they all were really grateful. Like, it seems to be in their culture, they're really grateful of what the Australians and the Americans and all that did for them. Like, they seem to put that effort in to help them themselves and stop the Japanese from overtaking them. So I feel like there's a lot of gratitude from this culture for the Australians, which is really nice to see. That, like, from someone that's, like, he's only 2 steps in my family tree above me, like, so it's really good to see. He was only 2 years older than me when he passed away, so.
Expect the unexpected is what we were told on day one, and that's never more relevant than when in the jungle. So when Plan A has been washed away by torrential floods, you just have to deal with Plan B, and in this case, a makeshift, half-built, half-caved-in log and mud bridge of sorts was our only real option for crossing this deep ravine. The jungle areas of Borneo are remote and unforgiving. There is no support, no phone service, and no emergency recovery services. You simply do what you have to do to keep the convoy rolling, and that's where experience and teamwork really come into play. Working together and taking it one vehicle at a time was the only way to go, and for each vehicle and driver, traversing the bridge was a different experience based primarily on wheelbase and the available traction. A simple slip here would be disastrous. The risk to man a machine was real, and the threat of lost time would weigh heavily upon our adventure. But with all hands and eyes on deck, one by one, the vehicles crawled or winched their way safely across the obstacle, keeping things as safe as is practical under the circumstances. Working together and utilising the equipment at hand as best as possible saw us smoothly crossing this section of rough terrain without mishap. For sure, they sometimes do things differently, but here in the jungle, you just have to get by with what you have, and that's exactly what we did. After an hour of slow going, careful wheel placement, guiding and at times winching, our convoy of 17 vehicles and 53 odd participants finally made it safely across the makeshift bridge. But our journey out of the jungle was far from over, and a long haul of muddy, slippery and rutted trails stood before us and our next destination. With time slipping away and the impending risk of sudden weather changes upon us, we were at the least making solid progress on these rough and rarely used jungle tracks. But there were smoother roads ahead as we climbed out of the jungle and into the rooftop of Borneo, where stunning views and a well-earned lunch awaited our weary group. Stops like this were frequent throughout our 2.5 weeks of following the Trans Borneo adventure. Even with the changes to our itinerary, we were still deep into the heart of the island, and well on our way to experiencing the many facets of this diverse environment and its inhabitants. But we were only around halfway through the journey, and there was plenty more to see and do, and plenty more trails ahead to be conquered. And that's how we rolled from day to day, transiting between the cultural, historical and natural features of this multifaceted island, and enjoying the adventure of being on and off-road as required.
We are in the Trans Borneo 2017, and I'm from Trans Trail Gear Sdn Bhd, and I'm the official driver for the media of four-wheel drive TV. This is my first Trans Borneo. Before that, we only organized a small group of us, 6 to 7 cars. We visit towns, districts out of Kota Kinabalu. My car, it's a Nissan Safari. Done a little bit of modification to it. We upgraded using UFI turbo, injectors, cross-country intercoolers, 4-inch snorkel, and fabrication airbox. The suspension is 6-inch lift from Superior Engineering. For off-road, I'm using the 36 Cymex Centipede. All other accessories that we have, the driving lights from Narwa, winches from Vaughan, fog lights, the camping lights, and the bar works are from Trans Trail Gear. This car is good for both on and off-road. It's a mean machine. Trans Trail Gear was founded in November last year. Me and my partner Black, we founded Trans because we wanted something different from what we have in Sabah. Most of the shops in Sabah are selling aftermarket parts, so are Trans, but we try to concentrate more on selling products from Australia, which we believe they have superior quality products that we can trust. If you are looking for any products that we carry in our shop at Trans Trail Gear, you can visit us at www.transtg.com.
Brunei, or as it's officially known, the Nation of Brunei, the Abode of Peace, is a small sovereign state on the north coast of Borneo. Despite the fact that the country takes up less than 1% of the island's landmass, it's historically been the most sought after and fought over location for hundreds of years. Located in the north of Borneo, it's positioned as a perfect stopping point for trading routes between China and Southeast Asia, creating a tug-of-war for occupation between countries and empires, including the Ming Dynasty, Spain and the Netherlands. Over time, many Muslim merchants and traders would visit Brunei, speeding the nation's conversion to Islam. At its peak, Bruneian territory stretched over most of Borneo all the way to the southern Philippines, ruled by a line of sultans from the 14th to the 19th century. It was visited by Ferdinand Magellan in the very first voyage around the world, and would later have to fend off Spain's attacks in the Castilian War. During the 19th century, the empire began to decline, eventually becoming a British protectorate in 1888 and wouldn't gain its independence back until 1984. Brunei experienced a period of huge economic growth in the 90s and 2000s, transforming it into an industrialised country. Due to its extensive petroleum and natural gas fields, the tiny sovereign state has risen to the 5th richest nation in the world and is one of only 2 countries with no national debt. Today, the nation is heavily urbanised, with over 75% of the population living in towns or the inner city. Its capital city is Bandar Seri Begawan, formerly known as Brunei Town, and is set to be our final destination when our expedition across Sabah is complete.
Welcome to the 2017 Sandakan Day Service.
We're here today to commemorate the sacrifice of a terrible event that occurred here in Borneo towards the end of the Second World War, when over 2,000 prisoners of war, 2/3 of whom were Australians, the other third were British, were forcibly marched from here to Brunei. It's a known fact that out of the 2,000, only 6 of those men survived, and all of those who survived managed to escape along the path of the march. They survived because the people of Sabah took them at their own personal risk and looked after them until at the end of the war, when they eventually came back to Australia.
I'm a trek leader with Sandakan Spirit. I've got a trek of 6 and we're about to march the Sandakan Death Marches. It's all about the history of it, a very important part of Australian history. I spent 35 years in the Australian Regular Army as an infantryman, so it's a very important part of my life, and I hope that my military experience hopes the trekkers on this and every trek I do reflect on the sacrifices that have been made so that we can live in the great country in freedom.
We honour the selfless actions of the people of Sabah, who risked and lost their lives because of the care they gave to those we loved and lost.
My ancestors have come from different parts of Asia, and they settled here many generations ago. I'm here today to honor those ancestors, particularly a few people who perished during the war. My great-grandfather, his name was Pongholo Stanislaus Dominic. My grandfather, Andrew Justin Pereira, but there were also others. It's helped me understand myself, as well as the path I've chosen with my own life. So it was beautiful to have that remembering with others who also lost their families.
A lot of people actually query why we commemorate these sorts of things, and the reality is acceptance that the sacrifice of their loved ones was for a purpose, and we recognise that. And indeed, it's even for present-day veterans, a number of whom you saw today, who are serving the Catapult Party. They go to war knowing full well that we will preserve their memory through events like this, and it is part of their mental health, mental well-being for what is a very difficult job that they have to do. People say that the Commonwealth is dead, but the reality is events like this bring to the fore that we actually have a shared history. It is events like this that, as the British High Commissioner mentioned, brings us together to remind us that we still have a history to commemorate.
As well as you do. As we sit here in this tranquility, it is a moment of peace that we can share. It is a moment of peace that we can cherish.
I think people are becoming more aware of how lucky we are when we see countries around the world that are in turmoil, and we live in such freedom. We have so many things. We live a pretty good life, and I think people are becoming very aware of it.
Seeing the solidarity and the common history was powerful.
As an Australian, I've been proud to come here and learn so much more about the links between Malaysia and Australia, especially during the Second World War. Now viewers, tune in next week when we're looking at the agriculture of the island and the diversity of foods that are produced here locally. I'm Simon Christie. Tread lightly, keep it safe, play hard. We'll see you next week.